Hi, I'm Holly, and I'd love if you would join me for a little coffee while I answer some of your questions about my Accent Reshape program. The Accent Reshape program is for you if you speak English at a high level, but it's not your native language. I work with a whole lot of actors who are having difficulty getting seen for roles or finding representation, and they feel like the way that they speak may be holding them back. I also sometimes work with public speakers. I've worked with politicians, people in the UN, real estate agents, bankers, anyone who speaks English regularly and who would like to improve their pronunciation. Maybe you feel like you've got to a certain level and then kind of plateaued or stagnated, or maybe you feel like you've been working on it for a long time, but there's just that little extra step that means that everyone is always asking you, where are you from? Where are you from? Where are you from? Unfortunately, in the industry and in the world that we live in currently, there's still a lot of discrimination or putting people in boxes when it comes to the way that they talk. So, 50% of it is maybe working to shape your accent into something towards a native speaker so that you can open up more opportunities, while also all of us together, me included, fighting for people to have the opportunities regardless of what accent they speak in, because that's the world we live in. Groups of friends nowadays come from all over the world, and that should also really be reflected on screen. I love this question and I hate this question. Is this accent reduction? Yes and no. So, in my opinion, accent reduction doesn't exist. The reason why I think this doesn't exist and it's the wrong term for everybody to be using is it implies that you can have an accent and you can lose your accent or reduce your accent. And that simply isn't true. Everybody in the world has an accent. Our accent is simply the combination of movement and sounds and intonation and rhythm that we use when we speak. So you can kind of think of it as like, instead of now I have an accent, now I don't. It's I have an accent that sounds more in this direction. Maybe your accent sounds a little more Spanish or French or whatever language you speak is your first language. And you can move it along towards something that's maybe more American or more British. But that doesn't mean you're reducing your accent. You're simply reshaping the way that your mouth makes certain sounds and movements. You can reshape your accent into any accent that you would like. The ones that I get asked for the most are General American, which is the accent that I'm using right now, or an RP, Contemporary British English, Southern British English. It's got loads of different names. I also often work with people who simply want to just improve their pronunciation so that they're very easy to understand and kind of neutral sounding. So maybe, right now everyone goes, oh, you're from France, oh, you're from France, oh, you're from France. And instead of that reaction, you might be aiming for something, like you're talking to someone for a few minutes, and then maybe after 15 minutes, they sort of go like, where are you from? That there's a little hint of something, but it's not easily distinguishable as you're French or you're Spanish or you're Russian or you're, wherever you come from. So there are a whole range of goals that people have, and part of what we do together is work on what option is best for you. Some people really want their accent to sound, like a native speaker 100% of the time. Other people are looking at this as more of like an opportunity to add it to our toolkit as performers or public speakers. The Accent Reshape is a program that includes a few different steps. So first of all, I ask for 3 recorded videos or audio, but video is much better so that I can also see you speaking. One of those videos, I want you to be speaking just off the cuff, without looking at anything, just really awkwardly. I know, speaking to camera, you can tell me a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your, obviously your language background is very helpful to know. What your goals are, that kind of thing, a little bit about you. The second video is you reading something that you've never read before. So that can be like part of a book, a news article, literally anything at all, but something that you've never read before, reading it out loud in that moment. And the third video is something that is a text, but that you've practiced. So this is kind of putting you in the situation that you would be in if you were performing a character, learning a script, giving a presentation. You're not reading directly, so you're not getting any visual input of the words. Maybe you haven't like memorized them, but you're not necessarily like thinking them and speaking them. Do you know what I mean? Those three instances are situations in which, believe it or not, every single person has slight changes in their accent. Even if you're, speaking in your first language, everyone has these little tiny differences that happen when they're reading versus when they're just speaking. And so it really helps me in my analysis by seeing your speech and hearing your speech in all three of those situations. After I receive the recordings, I do a thorough speech analysis. So I watch everything multiple times, quite a lot. And I basically am looking for all kinds of different things: positioning of the mouth, how your voice is resonating, specific sounds that maybe need to shift a little bit towards something a bit different. I'm looking for rhythm. I'm looking for how you connect your words, how you stress syllables and words, what your intonation looks like, the flow of your speech, all kinds of things. And I basically do a really thorough analysis. And then I make a plan of what exercises might be beneficial for you, what sounds and different combinations of sounds, words, rhythm things, any of the issues that I hear and see in your speech that we're going to work on in our Zoom session. I kind of write them all down and I start to compile a program specific to you based on exactly what you need to work on. I've worked with literally thousands of people from all over the world, and no two have ever been the same. Everybody and every body is a little bit different, and we need to look at what will work for you. After I carry out your analysis, we have an hour and a half long Zoom session together, and I take you through basically the whole program that I've put together for you. I record that session, and then after we're done, I send you the recording as well as the PDF that I put together specifically for you of like all of the exercises that we did, anything else that may have come up in our session that I didn't, have written down for my analysis, exercises, little reminders, descriptions. If it's necessary, I also include like little audio reminders so that you can go back and, listen to something specific. So I send you all of that, and then we have a follow-up call, which is about half an hour usually. And I always leave that for about a week and a half, 2 weeks after our first Zoom session, because that's about how long it takes your mouth to kind of start adjusting to things. And in that half an hour call, we touch base again. I answer any of your questions. And we also sort of see what has changed, what's still kind of like stuck, and maybe needs a little more adjusting. And we put together a bit of a plan of how you can continue to improve moving forward and where you need to be focusing your attention. In our Zoom session, you can I just spilled my coffee. You can expect to laugh a lot. I always say the most important thing to bring is a sense of humor, because this work is a little fun and funky. You can expect to be touching parts of your mouth, so you're going to need a mirror if you have one. If you don't have a mirror, like a second screen will do. Maybe you have, the Zoom on your computer and your phone nearby. Anything that you can use to sort of see your mouth and what it's doing is going to be great. Wash your hands, be sure that they're nice and clean. So you can expect to start with a little bit of a chat with me. Then we'll go into some physical exercises. This is the most important part of this training. Accents are very physical things, and too many people focus more on how it sounds as opposed to how it's moving, how it feels, the shapes you're making. So without this physical side of it, people tend to get to a certain point and then they sort of stagnate, because they're doing a very good imitation of English sounds with muscles that are not moving in an English way. So you can expect it to be very physical for at least the first half an hour or so. After that, we go through all of the sounds or kind of sound combinations that have come up both in my analysis and a little bit sometimes while we're speaking, one-to-one on Zoom. We'll make sure that your mouth is able to make those sounds in a more native speaker kind of way, according to which accent or, what your goals are. And we'll also talk about any other things that might be hinting at a different language background. So these can be things like word stress, syllable stress, how you connect your words together, how your rhythm is, what your intonation is doing, all of those other kinds of things that can sort of give you away. As in maybe not being a native English speaker. What we do in the Zoom calls depends a lot on where you're at, on your particular speech, what your particular goals are. So each class is very different depending on who I'm working with. How soon you can expect to see results, again, is a very personal thing, and there are a lot of factors involved, and it depends a lot on what your goals and your objectives are. I can say that after our Zoom session, you will notice it. You'll feel the results, you'll see the results, you'll clearly know what you need to do. You will have heard yourself sounding pretty close to a native speaker, for sure. The physical things happen really quickly. So this is like anything physical. You know, if you do yoga every day for a week, you're going to notice it at the end of a week. If you're going to the gym every day, you're going to notice it. It's muscular. If you're looking to completely change your accent permanently so that no matter in what situation you are, who you're talking to, you know, in any emotional state, you sound like a native speaker, that takes a lot more time, because that's very different than if you want to be able to audition or play characters with an accent that's closer to a native speaker. That takes less time. The actual time it takes, like I said, in both of those scenarios really varies person to person. It depends how much work you put in. And when I say put the work in, I mean like 10-20 minutes a day. It doesn't take a huge time commitment. The biggest things that you want to be focused on are 10 or 20 minutes every day of really, concentrated, focused, conscious work. And then awareness, noticing. Half of accent work is simply learning to be aware of what's happening. What are the movements? What does your mouth do? What does it sound like? Believe it or not, what does your mouth do when you're not even talking? All of those things are going to have a huge impact. I can tell you that you will notice a huge difference in about a month. Whether that huge difference is now I sound like a native speaker or wow, I'm much closer is a very individual thing, but it works. It really does work. So if you put the work in, you're going to see the results pretty fast. IPA, for those of you who don't know, is the International Phonetic Alphabet, and it's a system of symbols that correlate and correspond to a sound. So it's kind of like the alphabet of sound. You can think of it that way. Do I use it? Sometimes, but mostly for myself when I'm preparing. If I have somebody who has a very strong background in using IPA, yeah, I might use it, but only as a reference. I don't work with IPA usually because for me, it feels very like an academic linguistic thing as opposed to a practical, physical, thing that's going to help you change your accent. It's really helpful sometimes to be able to know the symbols so that, you can go, if you look something up, you can be like, oh, that's how you say it, because the symbol means that you pronounce this sound and not that sound. The problem that I have with it, and the reason that I don't use it when I'm working with people, is just because you know all of the symbols doesn't mean your mouth can make the sound. For people who are very visual learners, and who come from sort of a strong, like if you're very academic and you like that kind of really minute detail, and you're very good at picking up visual information, it can be really helpful to have a symbol that means this sound. And so that's great. As an identifier, it's really, really good. But focusing on IPA is not going to change your accent. Of course, I would love to continue working with you. So the reshape allows us to really dive in because of the analysis and the time that we're spending together. After you do your reshape program, A lot of people continue to do one-to-one sessions with me. Those can be 30 minutes or a full hour. And in those sessions, it's really good to work on specific text. It tends to be actors if you want to, put some stuff up on your spotlight with your accent or in your show reel. Or if you're a public speaker and you have a specific presentation that you want to work on, that's what I do in those one-to-ones. We can work on different texts each time if you want, or if you have some specific audition you want to look at, or you're playing a role or a certain script that you want to film, in 2 months and you want to get it as close to native speaker sounding as you can. That's the kind of stuff we work on in our one-to-one sessions together after you do your reshape. 22 years of trial and error, I would say. So I have been coaching people from a very young age. I've been doing it for 22 years professionally, 23 if you count sort of the first job I had, which I didn't get paid for. But basically, I came from an acting background, a performing background, and I started coaching accents because I had to do them and I did them pretty well. And then people asked for help and it all kind of snowballed from there. I've studied linguistics, I've studied neurolinguistics, a lot of history of, accents and languages. I've trained with some of the top voice professionals in the world, like Kristen Linklater predominantly. I've also worked with Patsy Rodenberg. I've done all kinds of workshops and, just self-study as well in neuroscience, the anatomy of the mouth, what happens in speech, how people learn language. And so the method that I use isn't really one specific thing. It's based on working with thousands of people all over the world in all different situations, individually in workshops, on sets, and from all different backgrounds, and figuring out over time what works, what doesn't, and gathering as much information as I can so that I have a huge toolkit to pull from as opposed to following one specific method. Me apart from other coaches. I think everything that you've heard so far, the fact that I have done this for, 22 years and come up with ways of working that are unique. They're a little bit different. I didn't do a master's in teaching voice or accents in particular. I kind of have taken a whole lot of information from a whole lot of different sources. So I think that's one thing that sets me apart. Another thing is that I have heard many times that it makes a big difference that I'm also very active in the industry as a performer. So you'll find a lot of coaches, not all, there are some amazing ones, but a lot of coaches come from a more language or linguistic background or voice, and they don't necessarily, how can I describe this? They don't necessarily all understand the delicate balance that needs to happen while you're on set performing of how much energy it takes, how much emotional commitment you need, and how distracting it can be to constantly be having to think about your accent. So I think I'm very good at maintaining that balance. And, we always need to remember that the accent is only one aspect of your character or your presentation or your performance. And if working on it too much is actually hindering you, we're going to just find a happy medium and get to a level where we can rely on our muscle memory so that in the moment when you're on stage or on screen or on set or whatever you're doing, your brain can just trust that your mouth has done the work and your attention needs to be elsewhere. You should never be thinking about your accent actively while you're performing. Another thing that sets me apart, I think, is that I do this in multiple languages. So I, for those of you who don't know, am based in Spain. I work on set, in theater, all of the things that I do in the voice world, dubbing, voicing video games, all of my different jobs, I do them in both English and Spanish. And what that means is that not only am I teaching you how to do this in English, I also have done and continue to do the work myself in Spanish. I perform in Spanish. I have an accent that's very close to native speaker, and I know what it's like to be in this industry in a bilingual international situation. I've done the work, and I've coached as well in other languages. I also have learned French. I grew up speaking French in Canada. I speak some Portuguese. I speak some Italian. I know what it's like to be in a multilingual environment and to be not only performing, but also doing it in another language. And on top of that, having to think about your pronunciation and shifting it towards something that's closer to a native speaker. So it's kind of a I practice what I preach situation. And it works really well. The other thing is we have a lot of fun. I always say I'm very professional, but I don't think that means you need to be like serious. So I can promise you that our Zoom sessions are not going to be boring. They're not going to be a whole bunch of like reading word lists and listening and repeating and all of the things that feel a little bit like language classes. That's not what we're going to do at all. It's very fun. And I think you're going to enjoy it and see the results. And that's my coffee done. If you have any other questions, you can contact me by email at hollydialect@gmail.com. And if you want to have a quick chat before jumping into your accent reshape to ask any specific questions that you may have, or simply just like get a vibe, you can do that by booking a little 20-minute intro call. We can connect on Zoom, and like I said, I can answer any questions that you might have, and we will jump into your accent reshape. So that's it for now. I can't wait to meet you and to work with you and to make all kinds of crazy faces with you and to hear the progress in your accent and your pronunciation as we get going on your accent reshape.